Welcome back to HipMojo 29, segment 2. Joining me today is Harold Simkins, professor of marketing at John Molson School of Business in Concordia. So I want to talk to you now about the role of the CMO and the role of vice presidents of marketing, and basically the marketing function within the boardroom. Within, does the marketing chief really have the ear of the CEO? And not in the context of, let's do this campaign, let's hire this agency. I'm guessing that's their job, and the CEO will listen. But if a CMO says, this is a crappy idea, or a crappy product, or this is crazy, how often does the CEO listen?
Does the chief executive officer?
Yeah.
Well, I would think a good chief executive officer would have confidence in his CMO because he or she has hired that person and has believed in their qualifications. So, and it's rare that an idea would get that far where a chief marketing officer would have to say to his or her superior that this is a bad idea. The idea should be killed before it even gets to that stage.
Okay, so what is your thought on CEOs who appear in ads? That's usually the kiss of death. Like when the CEO of Daimler Chrysler appeared, that's when people said this company is going to go downhill. It went downhill. So is when the CEO is cast in an ad spot, is that usually the idea of the marketing people, or is it the CEO who thinks this is a great idea, or is it the ad agency that's trying to butter up the CEO?
Well, oftentimes the ad agency has to drag the CEO in kicking and screaming. That oftentimes they don't want to appear in front of the camera. But there have been some tremendous success stories.
Such as?
Lee Iacocca with Chrysler, when they turned him around, when they turned the company around. The Wendy's CEO, Dave.
Of course,
Dave, Mr.
Yeah,
Dave.
Dave Thomas. Yeah.
Dave Thomas. When the crisis with Maple Leaf Foods, the Listeria breakout, occurred. I forget his first name, his last name is McCain, and he being front and center in the advertising and PR for the campaign to assuage the negative opinions that were forming, and reasonably so negative opinions that were developing out there. So there's oftentimes a good argument to put a CEO in the ads and commercials. I think the use of Galen Weston in a Loblaws commercials was effective.
Okay, so this is an interesting thing whereby I immediately assume the CEOs being cast in ads is a negative, because I think people tend to remember the disasters more so than, all the cruises that don't crash, nobody remembers them, but we remember Titanic and whatnot. Not very tasteful analogy, but is that something where whenever there's a mistake, do we only really, do you guys, like in marketing classrooms, do you only focus on the negatives or more so on the negatives as case studies? Or is it more the success cases? What are we more prone to remember? We always talk about New Coke, for example, but how often do we talk about, let's say, Coke's acquisition of vitamin water, which, while expensive, got them a foothold into something else?
Yeah, I mean, successes. I mean,
name me 3 amazing, for every 10 ideas that you have that's a marketing mishap, how many do you think of that are, let's say, smash hits and grand slams?
Facebook.
How so? Which one?
Well, Facebook as an idea,
okay,
as a business idea. Amazon.com as a business idea. BMW resurrecting the mini brand.
How important is the brand? Like Amazon started off as abracadabra. In your opinion, in terms of wearing the branding hat, would that brand would have ever been as successful as Amazon, or you think it doesn't matter, especially in the age of...
It probably could be, but they might have had to spend a lot more money on a brand like abracadabra than on Amazon. But Amazon doesn't mean anything anyway.
Well, I think it's more associated, like people probably recognize it a bit more than abracadabra, just the spelling alone, or?
Could be, but what does the Amazon River have to do with books?
Jungle, chaos, finding, no.
Yeah.
That might be a stretch. Okay, so let's now get to the list. What are some of your top marketing disasters?
One that came to mind this morning, I said, well, why haven't I thought about this one before? Remember Krispy Kreme?
Yes, of course.
Remember the lineups of people to get the donuts? Remember the buzz that was incredible? I mean, lining up for a product that wasn't that much different from what the competition, Dunkin' Donuts or Tim Hortons, offered. To be honest with you, I really never understood what the fuss was all about. Maybe what the fuss was about was the fuss. It was just that word of mouth, just that buzz, that, no Tom, he was in line 4 hours. And they were giving away donuts, and people would line up to get the free donuts. And that thing went to the top, hit the stratosphere, and sunk really, really quickly.
Why did it sink?
That's a good question. There were accounting irregularities in the company. I think it expanded too quickly. and they weren't able to make back the investment fast enough that they'd put in to expand. But there's an example of something that was really hot and died really, really quickly. Other examples of failures that I would note. Webvan. We had our version here called Peachtree. When we were going to be buying everything on the web, including groceries, and of course they were online grocery outlets. I never understood how that idea even got off the ground, because to deliver groceries to people's homes, you need a window. They were talking about installing lockable refrigerators outside people's homes so they could put the perishables in there, and just the cost of doing that.
You mentioned the Ford Edsel.
I didn't mention the Ford Edsel, but the Ford Edsel was...
Not today, previously when I emailed you.
Yeah. I can give you an even more contemporary example, because the Edsel example has been beaten to death. Saturn. In the late 1980s, early 1900s, GM set up this company, a different kind of car from a different kind of car company. The idea was to have a fighter brand, so a brand that would fight the imports, particularly the Japanese. It was built in separate plants. They did things like when you went to pick your new car up, it was like the delivery of a baby with balloons. Yeah. They treated people respectfully. So, and I had some of my students research this.
Shocking concept.
Well, like when women would, shocking concept in the car dealership, yes, to be treated, not assaulted. Being honest with women and treating women the same way they would treat men. Spontaneously, Saturn owners formed groups that would have annual picnics and safaris and that kind of thing. The brand really had a strong, loyal following, even though the car was pretty lousy. So if you read car reviews for similar vehicles, the Saturn usually came last. It was plasticky, noisy, not very powerful. It was it 2 years ago? GM shut the whole thing down. And one of the reasons that Saturn was a failure was they could never get their costs under control, or at least their cost base was too high to begin with. And so they couldn't make money. So a brand that resonated well with consumers died because of a costing situation. That GM's costs, including some of its legacy costs for pensions and all that kind of stuff that unions had negotiated, were just too high, and they could never get the costs down so they could price the Saturn to effectively compete with the Japanese and ultimately then the Korean competition.
I want to talk about one more example, and then we're going to take a break, come back, and just talk a bit more about New Coke, since that is the anniversary. Yep. So last year, Netflix did what any CEO, CTO, any logical person would say was a smart move. They basically said the future is in streaming. Yep. So we're going to spin off the old business of DVDs through the mail. Now, they rebranded it as Quickster. Yep. And basically, Netflix would represent the future. And if you look at this at arm's length, you're like, that makes sense. I mean, but the company got decimated by consumers. Investors said there's too much uncertainty, and what was a $13 billion stock, I think, ended up being like a $4 billion stock at year's end.
Well, plus they changed their pricing strategy.
So yeah, take us through that. I mean, take us through the Netflix episode. Is this a case of over time they will be vindicated, or is this just that everything went wrong? Was there foolish? Was it a marketing thing?
I don't think everything went wrong. They made a bad pricing decision. People felt they were being gouged, overcharged, and that was that. Can a company that does something like that recover? And the answer is absolutely yes. I mean, you rejig your pricing strategy. You stay out there with advertising that makes people feel good about the brand. Maybe you give people incentives and purchase bonuses to buy your product, to offset some of that opinion about your negative opinion about your pricing, and over time you can overcome it.
Okay, we're going to take a short break. We're going to come back and focus a bit on New Coke. We'll be right back.